The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
And we'll take it to hear from private sector, specifically from Roderick Jones. He began his career with Scotland Yard's Special Branch, focused on international terrorism. He's now the founder and chairman of the private security company called Concentric Advisors. Roderick, if you're available, go ahead and fire up your camera and we'll get you on here. Welcome, welcome. And what we'll do is we'll just turn to you and let's just get a few minutes of what you think about the current on the ground aspect of Russia's invasion in Ukraine and what you've learned and what it's taught us about threat intelligence.
Yeah, I was thinking of that listening to Kirill, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know him over the last few months and thinking with him on some of these issues. And the word that actually comes to mind for me is resilience, obviously, and for not just his company, but also the state. And I think that's sort of quite important when you think about critical infrastructure. Turns out the internet is quite resilient. And you know, even all the sort of hysteria about cyber war and cyber attack and cybersecurity over the last 10 or 20 years, it was designed to be a super resilient system, right? And I think that they're kind of finding that in pieces. But listening to Kirill and thinking about this as well, I think what people are trying to come to terms with now is sort of what the lessons from the cyber war in Ukraine. And I think in my mind, there's a couple of questions that semi-provocative, but I'll say them anyway. The first is, you know, essentially, did we overestimate Russian capability ahead of the war? Did we overestimate Russian cyber capability? And the second is, you know, a more macro question of did we actually overestimate the power of cyber war and cyber attacks in an actual kinetic invasion? And there's more august people that possibly can answer both those questions, but I'll kind of give it a stab. And I think the first one in terms of Russia, you know, overestimating Russian capability, obviously they had some effects early on, but without being too quiet, I'd probably say that, you know, the Russians possibly underestimated the Ukrainian capability on the other side, so they were able to balance them out. But I think how the Russians have performed in this war will be obviously a set of analysis that people will conduct over the years to come, and you know, hasn't been admirable across the way. So I think that, but that question of, you know, how to estimate our opponents in cyberspace and did we underestimate or overestimate their capability, I think is a really interesting one. Right now, the headline kind of says that we overestimated the Russians, but I'm sure that's not overly true. And I think the answer to the second question as well is really nuanced and very, very important. You know, have we overestimated the capability of cyber to attack and do damage to critical infrastructure? I think the answer is really nuanced, and what I think the analogy you can see in terms of the Russian conflict in Ukraine, their ability to conduct combined arms warfare seems limited to some degree. You know, and when you introduce a new tactic or a new capability such as cyber, and this is possibly the first time it's being used in conjunction with a kinetic war, that combined arms capability really sort of begins to make sense. Or if you don't get that right, you know, you're not going to win essentially, or you're not having the effect you want. So you know, in terms of how effective cyber war is, when I think people are coming to realize now, or certainly commentators and general public are, how complicated cyber is as an offensive tool. Defense is different, of course, but offensively, you know, to develop effective cyber tools, you use them, you take down some infrastructure, but then that infrastructure tends to be quite resilient, gets back up, patches itself, and you can't use that tool again. Whereas throwing a, you know, relatively cheap Iranian drone repeatedly over the border and blowing things up, you can do repeatedly ad nauseum. So I think, you know, the reason that we're looking at Ukraine and obviously working with UK Telecom is because they are in the heat of the battle right now. They are this massive kind of learning zone, and not that they want to be, but for some of these large questions that have been theorized and talked about over the last 20 years. But this is actually live proof now. Are these things resilient, or are they not, or are they critical, or are they not, or how do you stand them back up? I think so. So the lessons being learned in Ukraine now are going to resonate for quite some time, I think. And I think the future for Ukraine, once they win the war and they're through this, is possibly quite bright in the cybersecurity sector, because they will have this very in-depth experience about how to do this live and do it in a very dangerous neighborhood. So, those are really my main thoughts, Matt. And obviously, having had the pleasure of working with the UK telecom guys for a while and getting to know them, very impressed, obviously, with their capability and resilience. And possibly the answer to my question is the Russians just underestimated them and don't know what they're doing.
Well, thank you for that. I would say that the definition of resilience in this standpoint definitely shines through, because you do have to, you're under attack. The physical and kinetic aspect of that is very real. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that today. I really want to appreciate it, and we'll be sure to reach back to you and talk to you again on this in the future.
Okay, thanks, man.